So your video was off? Go down. Now you can talk.
Okay. you're viewing shared screen, I see 3 participants. Yeah, it says Lisa. It shows me as co-host.
All right. Good evening. We're getting everybody on here and situated. We're going to make sure that those of us that are hosting can hear all right. So, Terry, you got volume over there?
Yes, I do. Good evening, Sarah.
Excellent. And
I'm here. I know that I unmuted myself. Everybody got me?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Welcome.
Welcome to you too.
sounds good. I'm taking care of some sound things over here. All right. Well, we got 5 minutes till we kick off the actual event here. And we've got
All right, Sarah, you're breaking up and you've got a double voice. Have you got something else on that you're listening to yourself with?
muted the computer.
Yeah, you're cutting in and out a lot. You hear the same thing, Terry?
Is that better?
Yeah, say a sentence. Can you give us a full sentence, Sarah, so I can hear?
Tom, this is Terry. Do you hear me okay now?
I hear you fine. But I didn't, can Sarah hear me now?
I can hear you, Tom. Can you hear me better?
Yeah, now you've got a single voice and you're not cutting out anymore.
Okay, fantastic.
There's a delay, Tom, so we're just going to have to kind of work with it a little bit. I apologize for that.
Okay, well, as long as we know, then work with it, no problem.
So we've been getting ready for this for quite a few of the summer weeks. It's so exciting that we're finally going to start officially here in about 2 minutes.
It takes me back to my roots in public broadcasting.
Have you got your video off, Terry?
No, my video's on.
Okay, because you don't come up. Okay, maybe it's my settings.
As I'm sure many of our viewers know, getting used to these virtual events is a bit of a challenge. So this is our first ever here at Central Virginia Battlefields Trust. So we are excited about it, but we're also going to see how it goes. All right, it says 7 o'clock on my computer here. So it should be saying that on everyone's here on the East Coast. And I know that we have some viewers joining us from across the country. So Tom, are you ready to kick this off?
I certainly am. So welcome everyone to the Central Virginia Battlefields Trust's first virtual fundraising gala. Hope you're all ready to attend. I have some fun. It's some interesting things to show you and some interaction that we can do. We have Terry here, our executive director. We have Sarah, our assistant to the executive director, and kudos to both of them, especially Sarah, for working diligently to put all this together. So I'm turning it over to either Sarah or Terry, and let's get on with it.
Okay, thank you, Tom. I'd also like to welcome everybody to our first ever virtual gala this evening. We are doing Stephen Crane's Red Badge of Courage. And if you'd like to help support battlefield preservation, you can go to our website right now, cvbt.org, and click on the donate button. We have some great special thank yous for this event, and you can find out all about them there. Sarah, good evening.
Good evening. Well, as we were thinking about a theme for our virtual gala and fundraiser, we were inspired by Stephen Crane's classic novel, The Red Badge of Courage, which is set right here on the Chancellorsville battlefields. So we've been asking you guys as you're signing up if you're familiar with that novel, and we've got some mixed answers, which is great. So we're actually going to get started and show a video that gives a synopsis of that story. And it was produced by our very own president, Tom Van Winkle. So we're going to go ahead and get that started now. Tom Van Winkle. So we're going to go ahead and get that started now.
From the earth, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, resting. As the landscape
Tom Van Winkle. So we're going to go ahead and get that started now.
began to tremble with eagerness, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, which were resting. As the landscape
Tom Van Winkle. So we're going to go ahead and get that started now.
began to tremble with eagerness, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, which were resting. As the landscape
Tom Van Winkle. So we're going to go ahead and get that started now.
began to tremble with eagerness, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, which were resting. As the landscape
Tom Van Winkle. So we're going to go ahead and get that started now.
began to tremble with eagerness, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, which were resting. As the landscape
Tom Van Winkle. So we're going to go ahead and get that started now.
began to tremble with eagerness, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, which were resting. As the landscape
Tom Van Winkle. So we're going to go ahead and get that started now.
began to tremble with eagerness, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, which were resting. As the landscape
Tom Van Winkle. So we're going to go ahead and get that started now.
began to tremble with eagerness, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, which were resting. As the landscape
Tom Van Winkle. So we're going to go ahead and get that started now.
began to tremble with eagerness.
Okay, there seems to be a bit of a trouble with the sound. I'm having a couple people reach out and let us know that. So we're going to try to restart that here. Give me one moment to get that video reset. Okay, there seems to be a bit of a trouble with the sound. I'm having a couple people reach out and let us know that. So we're going to try to restart that here. Give me one moment to get that video reset.
Passed reluctantly from the earth, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, resting. As the landscape passed reluctantly from the earth, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, resting. As the landscape passed reluctantly from the earth, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, resting. As the landscape changed from brown to blue.
The video sound is not playing right.
We apologize for the technical difficulties. We had all this working properly previously. That's the great thing about live events. Sometimes you have technical difficulties on the fly. Once again, I'd like to thank you for tuning in this evening to CVBT's first virtual gala. We're talking about Stephen Crane's Red Badge of Courage this evening. And Sarah is diligently working on trying to get the video back up and running. So we appreciate your patience this evening. I'm going to invite Tom to tell a little bit about the history and the background of CVBT.
All right, now that I've unmuted myself, it probably looks less like I'm doing a ventriloquist act. CVBT was formed about 1996, in September of 1996, actually. A small group of people in the Fredericksburg area had gotten together and noted there was quite a bit of very precious Civil War history being lost. Actually, for the same reasons that the armies fought here so much back in the Civil War, is that this area is dead center between what was then the capitals of Washington, D.C. and Richmond for the Confederacy. That same position that we have now is the reason we have so much building, so much sprawl, so much everything that's just enveloping and just devouring the battlefields. So from the small group of people, we began trying to put together a little organization that would see if we could help the Park Service and save some of these parcels that the National Park Service could not purchase. They could only purchase what's in their authorized boundaries. And they could also only pay appraised value, and very few people would sell their properties for appraised value. So we stepped in, and to make a long story short, almost next year will be 25 years later. We are still in business. We have saved over 1,350 acres of battlefield here in the Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, Wilderness, and Spotsylvania battlefields. We continue to work very hard. When we can, we turn that property over to the Park Service when they're able to have it go into their inventory. We are a staff of volunteers, with the exception of two. Terry and Sarah are our only two paid individuals. The board of directors is all volunteer. We're a working board, so we've worked extremely hard at what we're doing. And we strive to be able to save this battlefield, to continue to tell the stories of history, which is very important. You got to realize that in this small area, these four battles, within 18 months, you've had over 100,000 troops battle here, over 100,000 casualties here. The town of Fredericksburg was decimated and destroyed. It was actually the first U.S. town occupied by U.S. forces. A lot of firsts happened here. So it's really a center. Virginia's had the most Civil War battles in the country. And this area here is center of all that. We save what we can. Obviously, you shouldn't and can't save everything. If you could, I always said you could put a fence around Virginia and save the entire state back from its colonial time to the Civil War. But we are a small organization that does tremendously large things. We work in conjunction with other Civil War groups. We work with the American Battlefield Trust quite often. Back when we were working on the Slaughter Pen Farm, the American Battlefield Trust got involved, and we got involved with that and gave them $1 million for that. So for a small group, we do quite a few things. Sarah's staring at me, so I got a funny feeling we've worked things out. Or have we worked things out, Sarah? Sarah may be muted. Sarah may be muted.
The cold passed reluctantly from the earth, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, resting. As the landscape
Sarah may be muted.
Brown to green, the cold passed reluctantly from the earth, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, which were resting. As the landscape
Sarah may be muted.
It's just saying Sarah may be muted. It's like it picks the wrong.
And the retiring fogs revealed an army.
I'm going to take over. Here we go. Okay. So we're trying to get the video running here. And what we're going to do is we're going to have everybody go on mute and try to see if we can get it without that feedback on the video that we've prepared for you.
The cold passed reluctantly from the earth, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, resting. As the landscape changed from brown to green, the cold passed reluctantly from the earth, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, which were resting. As the landscape changed from brown to green, the cold passed reluctantly from the earth, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, which were resting. As the landscape changed from brown to green, the cold passed reluctantly from the earth, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, which were resting. As the landscape changed from brown to green,
I'm going to relocate to another room and see if we're getting them.
All right. It seems like we're still getting a double feedback there. If someone is hearing the program clearly, go ahead and leave me a comment on the YouTube video, but I think all of us are having a bit of trouble, so I do apologize for that. We are working to see if maybe our computers are a little too close together here in the office. And yeah, we appreciate you being with us. We want to share this wonderful material that we've prepared. But we're gonna keep working on it here. Apologize for that. We practiced all week, seriously. So we're gonna see what we can do to get this going for you. For that, we practiced all week, seriously. So we're gonna see what we can do to get this going for you. For that, we practiced all week, seriously. We're gonna see what we can do to get this going for you. Okay, I think we've identified the problem. Now we are working on being able to fix it. It sounds like whoever says the last sentence keeps getting repeated. One of those delightful things here about technology. Okay, I think we've identified the problem. Now we are working on being able to fix it. It sounds like whoever says the last sentence keeps getting repeated. One of those delightful things here about technology. We've identified the problem. Now we are working on being able to fix it. It sounds like whoever says the last sentence keeps getting repeated. Those delightful things here about technology. We've identified the problem. Now we are working on being able to fix it. It sounds like whoever says the last sentence keeps getting repeated. Okay, let's see if that makes any difference there. Okay, let's see if that makes any difference there. Okay, let's see if that makes any difference. All right, still working on it on this side, trying a couple different settings to see if we can stop that double repeat going on. All right, still working on it on this side, trying a couple different settings to see if we can stop that. All right, let's test it again. So we're gonna go 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent. See if it's giving me a repeat on the Gettysburg Address there. All right, let's test it again. I think I may have fixed it here. Okay, I have an idea that we may have fixed it. So we're gonna see if I get a repeat on what I'm saying right now. And if we don't, then we're gonna go ahead and try to play that video for you. And thank you again for your patience. Okay. So, the cold passed reluctantly from the earth, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, resting. As the landscape changed from brown to green, the cold passed reluctantly from the earth, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, resting. As the landscape changed from brown to green, the cold passed reluctantly from the earth, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, resting. As the landscape changed from brown to green, the cold passed. All right, well, you are with us on this mission here, and that didn't seem to solve the situation. So we're gonna let in Chris Mikowski, who's joining us here, and we're gonna chat about preservation for a couple minutes and work on a new way to be able to show you these videos.
Howdy.
So Chris, I know you're joining us here, and I think you were out doing some battlefielding today. We are dealing with some feedback issues with our audio and having some difficulty playing the videos despite practicing multiple times this week.
It's Murphy's Civil War law, actually.
Yes.
Well, I can just recreate the battlefield tour from my computer here and just tell everybody what we were going to say out on the battlefield, if it comes to that.
Okay, that sounds good. So if you'd like to share, for a couple minutes about Chancellorsville Battlefield and a little bit of that connection to Red Badge of Courage, and we're going to work on getting those videos ready to play.
Very good. So Red Badge of Courage, I've read it a couple times in preparation for doing the tour, and I read it, last year just to revisit the book, and then, spending some time with it in a concerted effort this summer. What a wonderful book it is. And so if you haven't had the chance to revisit Red Badge of Courage, even maybe since your middle school days when you might have first read it, I highly encourage folks to go out and take a look at that book, because it is a wonderfully written book. And I almost call it a beautifully written book. I don't know if a war book can be beautiful or not, because Crane really does capture the intensity, the anxiety, the horrificness of what it's like to be on the battlefield. And I'm not saying that. I've never served, but the veterans themselves who read the book thought Crane had been there and were surprised to find out that he was a young whippersnapper. He wasn't born until I think 6 years after the war. And so growing up in Port Jervis, New York, his hometown, he heard the stories from the veterans who'd gone off and served. He soaked them in sponge-like. And that was really the basis for this book. And veterans who read it were just like, yeah, you got it. And I think that's one of the great powers of art, is that it can capture truth in a way that transcends fact. One of the key things that we'll talk about as we do the video tour in a few moments is that Crane didn't want us out and saying Henry Fleming was here at this spot at this time, or he went to this place, or he and his unit did this or that or the other thing, and here's how it compared to real life. That would all cheapen the experience of the novel. Now, having said that, I just spent 25 minutes doing that, and we'll see the results of it here in just a few minutes. But the point really was to touch on something larger, more universal, something that was transcendent beyond these troops moved from here to here at this point. The facts in many instances are completely irrelevant to the story he's trying to tell and the truth he's trying to convey. In fact, there are only 3 proper nouns that are actually used in the book. He talks about the Rappahannock River, he talks about Richmond, and he talks about Washington, D.C. So we know that they're in Northern Virginia. We know that they're on the banks of the Rappahannock. That narrows things down pretty well as far as what battle they're talking about. Beyond that, he doesn't offer any proper names of any officers. Anybody that's mentioned is fictitious. In fact, the unit that Henry Fleming belongs to, the 304th New York, is fictitious. It was an arms race to see how many regiments the state could crank out. That's why you see over the course of the war, rosters shrink and shrink and shrink and don't get replenished as the Army does now. They'll put new troops in with veterans and help kind of bring them up to speed and keep units at full strength that way. They didn't do that in the Civil War. A unit went in, and over the course of the war, as attrition whittled them down, a state would just create a new regiment. And so New York and Pennsylvania in particular tried to outdo each other to see who could create the most regiments. And it became a point of pride and bragging rights. Wasn't very helpful to the soldiers and the units themselves, because by the end of the war you've got units that have seen such terrible attrition over the course of the war that maybe they're down from 1,000 to a couple hundred. That's pretty incredible if you think about it. And when you talk about send in the division or send in the brigade, that means something early in the war different than later in the war because of the strengths that are involved with that. So the 304th New York sounds great, sounds fantastic. I'm sure New York State would have loved to have been able to claim they sent in 304 units. But again, that's part of Crane's efforts to just make things as obscure as possible. You know, the facts aren't what's important here. That said, as we go through the video tour here in a few moments, we'll talk about different instances or different parallels that unit in the book goes through that relates to real life events, that relates to some things that some real life regiments went through and some placements. But you could make several compelling arguments about, you know, this really resembles this unit or this really resembles that brigade. Fleming keeps things, or I mean, Crane keeps things incredibly vague for his own artistic license. And he talks about, you know, Henry Fleming wandered for a long period of time across the battlefield, or he talks about the unit was moved and then they were moved again. I mean, he doesn't talk about how far they went or how long it took them, or, you know, what the relative time period was that they were in a particular spot. When the 304th first goes in, they are marched up toward the front. They have to cross a stream. Then they settle in and they start building fortifications for themselves. And then they're ordered to pick up and move. And then they have to dig in again. There wasn't a whole lot of that digging in at Chancellorsville, like we would know for later on in the Overland Campaign, for instance. Fleming's unit has the time to have a leisurely lunch on the battlefield, you know. So again, time is really something that Crane plays with, so that he's got that artistic license to really tell the story he wants to tell. Sarah, I see you back. Is that with good technological news? Oh, you're Sarah, you're muted there. Looking at my screen. There we go.
There we go. We're going to take this in a way that I think Civil War colonels would be proud of us. And we are coming up with a way to show you these videos that we specially prepared. And Terry's going to be explaining that while I work the technical side of getting this ready for you.
Sarah, I think we're still seeing you and we're not hearing Terry. Unless I'm on a different feed.
No, I can see Terry also, but I can't hear him.
Okay, I'm seeing that as well. Okay, well then I will go ahead and share what our plan B is going to be, since it sounds like you can hear me here. So what we're going to do, we had 3 specially prepared videos. One was the book synopsis of Red Badge.
Test 1, 2.
And then Chris Mikowski's battlefield tour. And then a discussion about common soldiers during the Civil War. So I'm going to be uploading those directly to YouTube. You'll be able to find them on our channel. And I will also send out the links to you in an email tonight. So that's how we're going to get to share that with you. Our apologies that it didn't play the way we had intended it to.
Okay, and it seems like I have audio now, so thank you for that. Few technical problems as I relocated to a different place here in the CVBT office. Once again, thank you for your patience this evening. Like Sarah said, she's going to be posting those videos directly to YouTube and sending you links to check those out. We apologize once again for the technical problems this evening. Thank you for tuning in and supporting CVBT this evening during this virtual event. If you'd like to make a contribution to support battlefield preservation, you can do so by going to our website, cvbt.org. A question that Sarah was going to ask me here as part of this was about my experience with Red Badge of Courage. And quite honestly, it was not something that I had to read growing up in middle school or high school or even in college. My experience with the book is more recent. I read it for the first time within the past year. It was recommended to me by our very own Chris Makowski. And it was interesting because being here, I knew it was about Chancellorsville from the way he described the scene without actually saying that it was the battlefield. I do have a background of military knowledge. I spent 6 years in the Pennsylvania Army National Guard. So his experiences of being a soldier and those things spoke to me in a way that I understood. At times, quite honestly, I found it a bit frustrating. The way he talked about prior to the battle, how he had all this vigor and excitement about, being a hero. And then the moment came and he had his personal crisis of faith, but then he redeems himself later on in the story, and thought that was very compelling. And I went back and listened to it as an audiobook here in the last couple of weeks getting ready for tonight. And after being here a while, being more familiar with the battlefield and taking a second bite of the apple, as they say with the book, I found it more interesting the second time around than the first, and could relate more to the characters the second time around. So appreciate the fact that you recommended the book to me, Chris, and the fact that going back in it for a second time gave me a new appreciation for it.
And that's one of the things that I think is really cool about the book is you can go back and find new things about it when you revisit it and look at it. The old saying is you never read the same book twice, because you change, your perspectives change, your experiences change, and so the lens with which you look at a book changes over the course of time. And so different things jump out at different times over the course of your life as you read the same book over and over. And so you bring your own personal experiences, and that really influences and impacts how you understand the book. So, and it's a short book. I actually have the audiobook version of it as well, or one of several audiobook versions of it. It's like 4 hours to listen to, and so if you're like me, it'll go even quicker as you actually read it rather than listen to it. So it's not something that's going to take days and days and days to get through. You can probably get through it in an evening, and it's pretty smooth. So we are still working on our goodies here.
Once again, thank you for tuning in this evening. CVBT's first ever virtual fundraising gala around Stephen Crane's Red Badge of Courage. Once again, we apologize for the technical difficulties. That's part of the joy of doing live events. All the practice, all the preparation, making sure everything works right, and then you go do it live. And as we used to say in my past life, the joys of live radio, well, in this case, the joys of live Zoom and YouTube. Once again, thank you all for tuning in. If you want to do your part to help with battlefield preservation, you can make a contribution through our website, cvbt.org. If you support us this evening, we have some great little thank yous that we've done. Sarah produced a great ebook with quotes from the book and pictures from our area battlefields. Also, there's an audio recording of the short story, The Veteran, that Stephen Crane wrote after Red Badge of Courage, which in that story, Henry Fleming admits that it was Chancellorsville that he fought in, and tells a brief story of him as an older man and what became of him in the end. We also, if you make a contribution this evening, we have this great photo of some of the cannons at the Chancellorsville battlefield that we would love to send you also. So, appreciate your support of battlefield preservation, and you can do that at cvbt.org.
So if On your end, you can enable screen sharing. What I think I can be able to do is actually play the video from my screen and see if we can show the video that way. See if it works. I'm not sure who at CVBT World Headquarters has that ability. There we go. It says I'm a co-host now. Let's see if that lets me. All right, here we go. All right. Advanced screen sharing. Let's see what we can do. Chris Mikowski of Emerging Civil War for the Central Virginia Battlefields Trust, and I'm on the Chancellorsville battlefield today, walking in the footsteps of Private Henry Fleming from Stephen Crane's novel, The Red Badge of Courage. Steps is take you to some places on the battlefield that evoke some of the scenes in Crane's novel so that you can explore the battlefield, see some things that Crane's character saw, even though Crane himself was never actually here. He was born after the war even happened. But his writing is so evocative and connects people to the battlefield so successfully that veterans thought that he had been here. They were amazed at the skill in his writing. Behind me is the road that's going to head up to Ely's Ford. The Army's going to march from that area down into that area, the Chancellorsville intersection, that way just a mile. We know that Henry Fleming goes through 2 days of fighting in the course of the novel, which means he doesn't actually show up on the battlefield until the 2nd of May. So he misses all of the first day's fighting. So just by that clue, we know that he's either part of one of the final divisions of Couch's 2nd Corps to arrive here, or he's part of Dan Sickles' 3rd Corps. Scholars have done some work and have identified some particular regiments that maybe Fleming might have belonged to. But the novel says he belongs to the 304th New York, which is completely fictitious. Its exploits do relate to some actions that took place here and some specific regiments that took place here, and we'll go visit some of those over the course of our tour. But we know that Fleming starts the story in this area here around the Bullock House, and then will eventually go into the fight on the morning of May 2nd. He does so, his unit moves around, they get positioned, repositioned, shifted, they cross a small creek, they have time to eat lunch before they ever even see their first fighting. And it's in that first fighting that Fleming first realizes that maybe he's not quite cut out for this. He's been wondering about that for the whole first part of the novel. He finally sees the elephant and he flees. And his adventures are going to take him deep into the heart of the battlefield, off in that direction. And we're going to go find some places that look like and sound like some of the places Fleming runs across. But first, let's take a look here at the Bullock Farm. This was a farmstead owned by Oscar and Catherine Bullock. They had 2 infant kids. At the time of the war, Oscar was actually off serving in the Confederate Army. Also living here was Catherine's younger brother, David Kyle, 19 years old at the time of the Battle of Chancellorsville, best known as the guide who takes Stonewall Jackson down the mountain road for his appointment with destiny. We're going to take a walk from the Bullock Farm and the apex of Hooker's Last Line down the Chancellorsville History Trail and see some parts of the wilderness that actually look like the wilderness. As Henry Fleming is fleeing from the battle and he's pushing his way across the battlefield and away from the lines, he gets entangled in some areas that are pretty wild. He sees why this is actually called the Virginia wilderness. And you can still see that too by taking a walk down this trail. The forest at Chancellorsville is much more mature than it had been in 1863. We see much taller trees, a lot less undergrowth, and so we've got a mature forest, not the second growth, dense, deciduous jungle that soldiers saw during the Battle of Chancellorsville. If you take a look at this stretch of forest, notice that the trees are a lot smaller, they're a lot shorter, a lot of dense undergrowth, things are pretty thick, everything's fighting for that sunlight. The ground was cluttered with vines and bushes, Crane writes, and the trees grew close and spread out like bouquets. The creepers catching against his legs cried out harshly as their sprays were torn from the barks of trees. Elsewhere, he says, brambles formed chains and tried to hold him back. Trees confronting him stretched out their arms and forbade him to pass. The Chancellorsville History Trail is 3.6 miles long. It's a big loop that goes from the visitor center out to the Chancellorsville Mansion, up past Hooker Drive, and down to the Bullock House, in through the forest along the trenches, and then brings you eventually back down to the visitor center. There's also a half-mile loop on the other side of the visitor center. A great place to really get a sense of what the wilderness might have looked like once upon a time. I know this is supposed to be a history video, but I'm going to take a second to have a little nature moment, because one of the cool things you can see on this part of the trail in particular are these little funnel spiders. Take a look right over here. You can see one of their funnels. They create these funnels and they wait for prey to come that web, and then they wait down in the mouth of that. These things can be huge. Now, if I were to continue along that path, it would bring me out here along Hooker Drive, and you see the Parks and Maintenance building right across the road. There are some great earthworks off to the woods in this direction. This would have been where Darius Couch's second corps would have been located along Hooker Drive, across what today is Route 3, and up paralleling the edge of what we now call the McLaws Wedge, ground preserved by CVBT. I could go through the novel and make an argument that Henry Fleming's 304th New York Regiment was actually somewhere along this part of the line, part of Samuel Carroll's brigade in William Blinky French's division. And I always got to give extra blinks for Blinky French. And but of course, to Stephen Crane, that was all rather irrelevant. He didn't care about placing Fleming in an actual regiment. He didn't want us distracted by some of those particulars, because he knew some yahoo like me would be out here trying to walk in the footsteps. And that was beside the point for Crane. I can't stress that enough. As we'll see, though, there's probably some compelling evidence that that Fleming's 304th was based on a different unit in the 3rd Corps, but we could make that argument that they were here. And that's one of the things I think is genius about Crane's work, is that it does sort of transcend specifics and allows us to tap into universals. I'm on a different part of the trail now, across from the Bullock House site, but this time going through the woods in the opposite direction. And one of my favorite parts of the novel is where Henry Fleming finds himself in a cathedral of trees. And he has to push himself through some pines in order to get to this cathedral. There aren't many pine stands left that you could push your way through on the battlefield now, but you can see above me that there are still some tall ones these days. In fact, the woods of Chancellorsville and the wilderness are filled with these tall Virginia pines. They've got very shallow root systems, and so they're vulnerable to weather. Strong storms can push them over. A lot of them have been heat weakened this particular summer, and a few have toppled. But here we can, along this stretch of the path, we can actually see that cathedral of trees with the sun dappling down through, and it's just a gorgeous little spot. You can see there are actually some earthworks behind me, some lunettes, not very commonly visited here on this part of the battlefield. But all along the stretch of the path as you go through, you can see some works as the army stared at each other on May 3rd and 4th. Very different sort of forest than we were just walking through. Much taller trees here, and again, this would not have necessarily been the case at the wilderness during the Battle of Chancellorsville. But that one scene is so evocative as Fleming pushes his way into that cathedral. Now, what Henry finds when he pushes his way in there presents one of the most sublime moments of the whole novel. He finds the body of a dead Union soldier whose blue uniform has aged such that it has turned green. It's not something that you would have found here in the wilderness at the time. You would have found in the wilderness 1864, but the armies had not been to this part of Virginia in 1863. So who was the soldier? how did he get here? Was he a deserter? If so, he's on the wrong side of the river from where the Union encampment was all winter long. So it's a real mystery, but it is the sort of thing soldiers would have seen in 1864, and young Crane growing up would have heard stories about from veterans telling their tales. So it's something that he worked in here. It's a cool little mystery, but it also provides a pretty interesting tension at that moment, juxtaposing the beauty of the woods against the horror of this corpse with insects crawling on its face. The stretch of the trail I'm on, just up a little farther from where I was, the Ely's Floor Road is just behind me right there. I can actually see street signs and hear cars. So we're just off the road, even though cars going by wouldn't know that the path is quite so close. I'm over by the Chancellorsville intersection now. Modern day Route 3 riding behind me, east to west there. The road to the river, here at Ely's Ford Road right here, and off beyond the intersection is the old Plank Road. The Plank Road and the Turnpike each get mentioned once in the novel, and as folks familiar with the battlefield know, in places the Plank Road and the Turnpike are the same road. So it's really hard to use those as reference points. And that's one of the things that makes it hard to locate Fleming on the battlefield, regardless of where his unit was. When he wanders away on that first day, he gets far away from the battle, so much so that it's quiet in the distance. It's hard to do that here on this battlefield without crossing one of these roads, which Fleming doesn't seem to do until later in the day. So that's one reason why it becomes then sort of impossible to really trace his footsteps. Again, for Crane, that's not really the point. But it does make it hard if people who are taking things literally to try to situate Fleming somewhere on the field. A couple times, Crane writes about the road to the river. That would have been off in that direction, but he also talks about the road to the rear. And if we're at Chancellorsville and the fighting is taking place in that direction, moving in this direction toward the camera then becomes moving toward the rear. So again, it can be kind of confusing as far as battlefield orientation. As Fleming continues to make his way through the woods across the battlefield, Crane writes that he once found himself almost in a swamp. He was obliged to walk upon bog tufts and watch his feet to keep from the oily mire. There are a couple spots like that on the battlefield, low places that collect water. And here's a spot along the Chancellorsville Wilderness Trail, about 0.2 of a mile in from the Chancellorsville clearing. We can find another such spot down by Lewis Run near Catherine Furnace off Furnace Road. Now, if he is sloshing through the water down near Lewis Run, we're pretty far away from where we started this tour. Crane does give Fleming the chance to wander through the battlefield. He gets far enough away from the fighting that he can't actually hear the sound of it. It goes dim in the background. So perhaps he got his way down here, or perhaps he actually started here and wandered his way up. One of the units that Crane modeled Fleming's experiences on is the 124th New York, the Orange Blossoms. The Orange Blossoms came from Orange County, New York, right where the northernmost tip of New Jersey meets Pennsylvania and New York. A little town there called Port Jervis was Crane's hometown, and the 124th was mustered from that area. If the experiences of the 304th New York were based on those of the Orange Blossoms, then they would have come from that area around the Bullock Farm, down past the Chancellorsville Mansion, westward along the Turnpike, and then down over Hazel Grove into this area, coming from that direction, then down toward Catherine's Furnace. They would have been part of the force used to attack Stonewall Jackson's marching column as it went on its flank march. Now, this is going to be the first time that Fleming's unit is ever engaged, so they don't necessarily have a scale for what a big fight looks like. But this first fight seems bad enough for Fleming that he gets scared and then rationalizes an excuse to desert. He runs off into the forest. The fighting here by the Orange Blossom, the 124th New York, would have carried him down in that direction. They would have been facing the 23rd Georgia under the command of Colonel Emory Best. Eventually, the Georgians would have been overwhelmed, and it would have been a pretty stout resistance. So enough for the Federals to feel like they were kind of in the thick of things, and certainly enough to scare Fleming off. So that's one scenario that might have put him down on this sector of the battlefield by Catherine Furnace, the ruins of which you can see behind him there. Regardless of what unit Henry is with, his wanderings on the battlefield near dusk on May 2nd do bring him to this area on the Chancellorsville battlefield. Off in that direction is Hazel Grove. The visitor center is directly across the street. In that direction is Chancellorsville, about a mile away, and in that direction is Germaniford, the wilderness. He finds himself here and talks about the charge of the 8th Pennsylvania Cavalry. He doesn't mention the unit by name, but it is the only cavalry charge that happens during the battle. It achieved much attention over the course of the year. It's also at this point in the novel that Henry encounters fleeing refugees from the attack of Stonewall Jackson on the 11th Corps. They would be coming from that direction into that direction. He receives his red badge of courage when one of those fleeing refugees, speaking in an accent in the novel, hits him with the butt of his rifle. So now Henry has an excuse when he goes back to his regiment to say that he got separated and hurt in the fight instead of just ran away. He'll earn that badge during the fighting, of course, the next day. So we don't know exactly where he was when he receives that wound, but we know it's on this road. We know that he saw the charge of the Pennsylvanians. He also makes mention of the fact that the fight that he was engaged with earlier, which may have been the fight at Catherine Furnace down in that direction, seemed like a mere skirmish compared to the sound that erupted on the Union right, which would have been off in that direction as Stonewall Jackson, pushing his way that way, finally slams into the Union flank. There are several instances where they talk about off on the right, or where Crane mentions hearing fighting off on the right. So it's generally considered to be off in that direction. So that helps place and situate what's going on. Henry Fleming actually finds his regiment on the evening of May 2nd, and they settle in. He's got some quiet and peace. But of course, on the night of May 2nd, Dane Sickles and the 3rd Corps launch a night attack, which is actually kind of disastrous because Sickles runs into members of the 12th Corps off in that direction. Either way, on the morning of the 3rd, the regiment does find itself in action again. The Orange Blossoms would have been off in that direction. And even as James Archer's Confederate Brigade was sweeping up in this direction, Sickles had received orders from Joe Hooker to withdraw back to the main Federal line, which is off now in that direction. So the 3rd Corps is starting to pull back. As a result, the Orange Blossoms find themselves just beyond that little rise over there, caught between the lines as Archer's men come up. And the regimental history talks about it being a very hot place, and things are a pretty tight contest there. And it makes the men of the regiment realize that the fight that they had been in the day before was probably nothing more than a light skirmish compared to the intensity of this battle. They are going to be able to extricate themselves from that area, sweep down off in that direction, and find themselves some protection with the main line. But no sooner do they do than they're actually ordered back in as a charge to help hold the Confederates back while the rest of the 3rd Corps makes its withdrawal. It's a even more intense action. The colonel says that they thought they'd been in a hot place over there, and when they get over to the new line, it becomes even hotter. In fact, they're going to lose about 220 or so men out of about 550, roughly a 36% casualty rate. So a pretty intense. But what's most significant about that action is that the regiment in the novel goes through the same crisis of faith that Henry Fleming had the day before. Henry finds himself in the crucible of battle, finds himself wanting, and he flees into the woods. He later finds his courage, comes back, and he proves himself in the fight on that morning of May 3rd. Meanwhile, in that fight, the regiment itself begins to waver and has its crisis of faith, and they actually pull back. They're mocked by some of the veterans, but they find their fighting spirit later in the day and put up an almost demonic fight. Henry Fleming, and over the course of the day, after running in fear the day before, is lauded for his bravery on the battlefield. The colonel sees him and says, that man is a Jim Dandy. The Orange Blossoms, as I mentioned earlier, fantastic regiment. They're going to have 5 Medal of Honor recipients come out of that, including one who's going to earn it right here at Chancellorsville. Jim Conklin, a character in the novel, is actually based on a real private Jim Conklin who was a member of the 124th. In the novel, Jim Conklin dies, but in real life, Jim Conklin goes back to Port Jervis and lives out a happy retirement. After the 304th extricates itself from Hazel Grove, which from here is going to be in that direction there, they're going to fall back here to Fairview, where there's going to be a pretty intense concentration of federal infantry and artillery. There are going to be 34 federal artillery pieces here squaring off against about 40 Confederate artillery pieces back there at Hazel Grove. Now, in the real live footsteps of the 124th, they're actually going to be posted right over there behind me along the road. So they're going to see some pretty intense fighting back and forth. In the novel, the 304th involved in that sort of fighting is going to redeem its honor after the ill-fated charge earlier in the day. So things are going to get pretty tough. This area, of course, sees intense fighting. It's the epicenter of the federal position. And as Confederates keep hammering and hammering and hammering here, eventually, as these artillery pieces start to run out of ammunition, the Federal Army is going to start to fall back toward Chancellorsville in that direction. Now, we can place Henry Fleming here because he talks about the Chancellorsville mansion and he talks about these guns that were over here. If his unit is posted along the road there, he talks about the guns off on the slope to his left. And he talks about the Chancellorsville mansion behind him, a big white mansion with a row of horses tethered out front. So we can pretty clearly identify where he's at on the battlefield. Eventually, as the Union Army pulls out and begins its withdrawal, Henry Fleming's unit pulls out in really good order. They march away pretty spectacularly and smoothly. If you consider the chaos going on at the moment in the middle of the battle on May 3rd, not a whole lot of units necessarily were able to pull out in good order. But Darius Couch does a pretty magnificent job saving this army, pulling it back. He's got some good help from Henry Slocum, and they prevent a rout with a fairly organized, if a bit pressured, withdrawal back past Chancellorsville, up Ely's Ford Road, toward what today is known as Hooker's Last Line. Before we leave Fairview, let's just take a quick look around here. We'll go over here to the location of the overseer's house that once stood here. Just beyond there is the old Chancellor's Cemetery. There are 25 headstones there today. There had been a white picket fence that surrounded the cemetery at the time of the battle. If we go over here, there are some pretty interesting lunettes to take a look at. A lunette, a half-moon shaped fortification used to protect an artillery piece. One of the interesting things out here at Fairview is the sort of competing lines of lunettes. These ones all face south. They were dug on May 1st as Federals were expecting, if there was going to be any Confederate attack, and come from the south in that direction. But when things start coming from the southwest and the west, they realign their position and change their gun pits pretty hastily. When the 304th is at Hazel Grove, Green writes that they can actually see in one cleared space there was a row of guns making gray clouds, which were filled with large flashes of orange-colored flame. Probably talking about these guns right here. Over some foliage, they could see the roof of a house, perhaps the overseer's house, perhaps the Chancellorsville mansion off in the distance. One window glowing a deep murder red shone squarely through the leaves. Another nature moment real quick, hard to see, but there's a flock of turkeys in this field I've been watching all summer. We're going to wrap up right across the street from where we started. This is the apex of Hooker's Last Line. If we were to go across the street, Bullock Farm is over there. That's where we began today. There is Bullock Road. Takes us down to the visitor center, except it's one way, so you can only come this way. You can't go that way. But here at the apex of Hooker's Line, Henry Fleming and his regiment actually march on the road back to the river, which is then going to take them up in that direction. Now, they've been fighting for 2 days. As we know, the battle of Chancellorsville started May 1st. Henry Fleming gets in here. After that truck goes by, Henry Fleming gets here into the fight on the 2nd. he proves himself on the 3rd, and then late in the day, he marches to the rear. But we all know that the action here at Chancellorsville takes place also on the 4th, as action shifts down towards Salem Church. Lee marches back on the 5th, ready to attack, but that's when the Union Army finally heads across the river. But it's important to note that even though the novel makes it sound like that Fleming is on the road to the river, that road right there, they don't actually cross. And that's because Fleming has learned the lesson he needs to learn. He's come to the epiphany he needs to come to. And so Crane's able to end the novel without actually taking Fleming off the battlefield. So he, like the rest of the army, pulls back on the 3rd of May, past the apex into a more consolidated position, able to get there in good order. And as he does so, the novel comes to its conclusion. And with that, that brings to an end our time on the Chancellorsville battlefield as well. Hopefully you've seen some things today that help bring to life some of Crane's prose. I urge you to read the book if you haven't, because it's a wonderful book, but then also come out on the battlefield and explore, and you'll see some of the things that Crane helped readers see some of the things his character Henry Fleming saw, or some of the types of things. Nothing beats being out on the battlefield. But for readers of Crane's Red Badge of Courage, a lot of them thought that that book was the next best thing. I'm Chris Mikowski of Emerging Civil War for the Central Virginia Battlefields Trust. Whew.
Christopher, thank you very much for that.
And what a pleasure it was to be out on the battlefield. It was a really neat way to see a battlefield that I see every day. I take my morning jog on the Chancellorsville History Trail. And so to literally re-see that trail that I'm on every day through the lens of Red Badge of Courage was a real privilege to be able to look at that landscape and appreciate it in that different way. So I encourage people, read the book and then go tramp the battlefield. You don't have to be in Fleming's specific footsteps to be able to see the sorts of things that Crane was trying to share and show. And it's a really rich way to experience the battlefield.
And actually, Chris, it really helped me out. Even though I've gone through the book twice within the last year, it wasn't until watching your tour there that, wow, he covered the entire battlefield.
He does
in the book.
He does, and part of that is because he's going through, what in literary tradition we would call the long night of the soul. When he flees and he has to kind of go through his own personal wilderness and come to grips with what he's learned about himself, and then bring that back and come to some sort of personal growth. And so, the wilderness as a metaphor for that is fantastic. And so he's able to cover a lot of ground because internally he's covering a lot of ground. So Crane makes really good use of that.
Yeah, and that really drove it home for me. So thank you for doing that video. Sarah has been busy while you were playing that. She's working on some stuff to get all the individual videos up on YouTube. If you're still tuned in with us, we'll be sending an email out to everybody before the night is done with links to all those individual videos on our YouTube channel. If you have any problems with them at the time, please drop us an email, use our contact form on the website, and we will get that figured out for you as quickly and easily as we possibly can. So thank you for tuning in tonight. This is the CVBT Stephen Crane Red Badge of Courage fundraising gala. Hasn't gone off quite as smoothly as we were hoping this evening, but we are making do, as they say, the joys of, as we used to say in my old life, the joys of live radio, well, the joys of live Zoom and YouTube. You can support battlefield preservation at our website, cvbt.org. We have some wonderful appreciation gifts for you for doing so this evening.
Terry earlier mentioned a short story that Crane wrote called The Veteran, which takes Henry Fleming from Chancellorsville and places him in later in life. What's kind of funny about that is the two stories were actually only written about 6 months apart. Because Red Badge was so successful, Crane did The Veteran kind of as a follow-up sequel to it, and he closes the loop on Henry Fleming's story. And I don't want to give away the ending or anything like that, but in that short story, he explicitly says that was Chancellorsville. It's the only textual reference we have anywhere in Crane's work that traces what happens in Red Badge of Courage to that particular landscape. Cool little story. As I understand, one of the videos that you'll be able to see on our YouTube page is Terry actually reading that story. It's available in the public domain, so folks can read it online if they'd like and find it easy enough. It's also in a lot of Crane's collected works. Along with the short story that he writes about the Battle of Fredericksburg called The Little Regiment, which is also a cool little story. So Crane kept coming back and back to the Civil War, even though he was not alive at the time, because he understood its significance and how the stories from the war resonated with so much of America as a reading public, and what a rich source of content it was. So I urge you to find The Little Regiment, find the veteran, read those things for yourself, but of course enjoy Terry's rendition of it when we have it uploaded to our YouTube page as well.
Thanks a lot. Tom is going to go ahead and try to play one of the videos for us. If Sarah, you could set Tom up with sharing his screen, then
I'll give that a shot myself, Terry. I'm working several screens here. It's kind of like NASA in my office. Like they say about battle plans, they never survive the first shot. Ours didn't either, but I'm going to give this a try. What we're going to try to show you is a synopsis of the book. So I'm going to give this a shot now. The host has got to let me do this. Apparently, Terry, you've disabled my screen sharing ability.
Sarah, can you give Tom screen sharing, please?
I just did.
Okay, thank you.
I'm still getting the same response here that it's disabled. Yeah, I thought this was going to be easy. Okay, now I'm good. All right, let's see if we can't get this going here. I've got the video running. Do we have that going?
No, Tom, I am seeing your desktop.
Okay, we don't want to see that. Give me a quick second.
Tom?
Yep.
Sarah says that open the video, start playing it, and then share from there.
How about
There you
now?
go. Yep, see it now. Thank you.
Do we have any audio?
You have to share your audio too.
Okay, I got to figure that one out.
Sarah says it's a little on the same screen where you shared your video, there'll be a sharing of the audio.
Hey, Tom. To share the audio, it's actually going to be back on the screen in Zoom where you select which screen you're going to share. It should be a little checkbox down at the bottom.
Okay.
I can just make something up while we're waiting.
Now, let me give
The fog of war hung heavy over the battlefield.
Still no audio? No. Let me try again. I can't find that screen.
I can't.
Yeah, I'm having difficulty finding the screen for the audio.
Tom,
Yes.
Sarah says that she's in the process of putting all the videos up on YouTube individually, and that that we've been defeated by technology this evening.
Yeah, but we're so close right now. If I could find that one screen we're talking about.
Um,
Hey, Tom.
Yes.
Go ahead and unshare your screen on Zoom. I'm going to see if I can walk you through to find that little checkbox.
Okay, let me get back into Zoom here. Okay.
Okay, so now when you click that share screen button, it should pull up an option where you're going to choose, and you would be choosing to share the video, but before you hit the share button, there should be a little checkbox in the left-hand corner that should
Gotcha.
say that video.
Air computer sound.
Yes.
Okay.
And then just select that video screen that you want to be able to play from, and we'll see if it works.
Okay, let me get back to that. We should be good to go. Hang on, I got to get back to that screen. Give me 60 seconds and we'll have it. Promise.
Sounds good.
All right, here we should be go here. Share computer sound. Now I just got to find the
And at night, the cold passed reluctantly from the earth, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out.
Almost had it.
All right. Well, we can hear the audio, so that's good. We just want to be able to see that video too.
This should do it.
Long troughs of liquid mud to
Looks good.
Okay, here we
the
go.
cold passed reluctantly from the earth, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, resting. As the landscape changed from brown to green, the army awakened and began to tremble with eagerness at the noise of rumors. It cast its eyes upon the roads, which were growing from long troughs of liquid mud to proper thoroughfares. A river, amber tinted in the shadow of its banks, purled at the army's feet. And at night, when the stream had become a sorrowful blackness, one could see across it the red, eye-like gleam of hostile campfires set in the low brows of distant hills.
The opening lines of Stephen Crane's classic novel, The Red Badge of Courage, are firmly rooted in the dirt and grass of Central Virginia. Published in serial form in 1894 and as a novel the following year, the fictional story unfolds during the spring of 1863 and the Chancellorsville Campaign. As the opening scene continues, federal soldiers argue about the rumors for the Army of the Potomac's next movement. This has a profound effect on one young soldier, Henry Fleming.
He tried to mathematically prove to himself that he would not run from a battle. Previously, he had never felt obliged to wrestle too seriously with this question. In his life, he had taken certain things for granted, never challenging his belief in ultimate success and bothering little about means and roads. But here, he was confronted with a thing of the moment. It had suddenly appeared to him that perhaps in a battle, he might run. He was forced to admit that as far as war was concerned, he knew nothing of himself.
As the campaign march begins, Henry spends a lot of time observing his fellow soldiers in the regiment and pondering how he will react when he is in battle for the first time. Soon, the regiment moves towards the sound of the guns.
After a time, the brigade was halted in the cathedral light of a forest. The busy skirmishers were still popping. Through the aisles of the wood could be seen the floating smoke from their rifles. During this halt, many men in the regiment began erecting tiny hills in front of them. They used stones, sticks, earth, and anything they thought might turn a bullet.
The regiment is moved from the shelter of their temporary trench and enters combat for the first time. Henry sees some of his comrades fall dead or wounded. He develops a fiery anger, realizing war is not the glory he once thought it was, and fearing that he has been sent out to be killed. In the second attack, Henry's resolve breaks.
Directly, he began to speed toward the rear in great leaps. His rifle and cap were gone. His unbuttoned coat bulged in the wind. The flap of his cartridge box bobbed wildly, and his canteen by its slender cord swung out behind. On his face was the horror of those things which he imagined. He ran like a blind man. Since he had turned his back upon the fight, his fears had been wondrously magnified. Death, about to thrust him between the shoulder blades, was far more dreadful than death about to smite him between the eyes.
After Henry flees from his regiment's battle line, he has a series of encounters with ghostly corpses, wounded soldiers on the road, and officers who say that his regiment did not flee under fire. After witnessing the death of one of his close friends, Henry begins to regret his flight while still making attempts to justify that he has lived to fight another day.
The youth cringed
as if discovered in a crime. By heavens, they had won after all. He turned away, amazed and angry. He felt that he had been wronged. He went from the fields into a thick wood, as if resolved to bury himself. He wished to get out of hearing of the cracking shots, which were to him like voices. At times, he regarded the wounded soldiers in an envious way. He wished that he too had a wound, a red badge of courage.
Later in the evening, as Henry tries to confront another unit of fleeing soldiers, he is struck on the head and finally gets a wound. With this injury as his cover excuse, he decides to return to his regiment, arriving late in the night and welcome back without suspicions of cowardice. The following morning, Henry gets ready for another day of battle, but approaches the coming experience with a different perspective and a new determination.
He did not give a great deal of thought to these battles that lay directly before him. It was not essential that he should plan his ways in regard to them. He could leave much to chance. Besides, a faith in himself had secretly blossomed. There was a little flower of confidence growing within him. He was now a man of experience.
Henry's new resolves are quickly put to the test, and he fights with a barbaric fierceness, earning the admiration of his officer and fellow soldiers. By chance, Henry overhears a general ordering his regiment to attack in a desperate, nearly suicidal charge. Faced with the knowledge and choice, Henry, already offended that the general's insulted nickname for his unit, decides they must succeed and prove their courage. He takes a prominent part in rallying and leading the regiment, and in the midst of the charge, Henry is inspired by the regimental flag.
Within him, as he hurled himself forward, was born a love, a despairing fondness for this flag which was near him. It was a creation of beauty and invulnerability. It was a goddess, radiant, that bended its form with an imperious gesture to him. It was a woman, red and white, hating and loving, that called him with the voice of his hopes. Because no harm could come to it, he endowed it with power. He kept near, as if it could be a saver of lives, and an imploring cry went from his mind. In the mad scramble, he was aware that the color sergeant flinched suddenly, as if struck by a bludgeon. He faltered, and then became motionless, save for his quivering knee. He made a spring and clutched at the pole. The youth and his friend had a small scuffle over the flag. "Give it to me." "No, let me keep it." Each felt satisfied with the other's possession of it, but each felt bound to declare by an offer to carry the emblem his willingness to further risk himself. The youth roughly pushed his friend away. He saw that to be firm soldiers they must go forward. It would be death to stay in the present place. The youth kept the bright colors to the front. He was waving his free arm in furious circles, all the while shrieking mad calls and appeals, urging on those that did not need to be urged. For it seemed that the mob of blue men hurling themselves on the dangerous group of rifles were again grown suddenly wild with an enthusiasm of unselfishness.
After moving from cowardice to courage, inexperience to veteran, and panic philosophy to passionate inspiration, Henry Fleming discovers that he has proved himself and crossed the threshold from youth to manhood. As the Union Army retreats in the rain, he begins to forgive himself for running, realizes that he has redeemed himself, and leaves the field of battle changed forever.
He felt a quiet manhood, non-assertive, but of sturdy and strong blood. He knew that he would no more quail before his guides, wherever they should point. He had been to touch the great death, and found that, after all, It was but the great death. He was a man. And so it came to pass that as he trudged from the place of blood and wrath, his soul changed. He came from hot plowshares to prospects of clover tranquilly, and it was as if hot plowshares were not. Scars faded as flowers. It rained. The procession of weary soldiers became a bedraggled train, despondent and muttering, marching with churning effect in a trough of liquid brown mud under a low, wretched sky. Yet the youth smiled, for he saw that the world was a world for him, though many discovered it to be made of oaths and walking sticks. He had rid himself of the red sickness of battle. The sultry nightmare was in the past. He had been an animal, blistered and sweating in the heat and pain of war. He turned now with a lover's thirst to images of tranquil skies, fresh meadows, cool brooks, an existence of soft and eternal peace. Over the river, a golden ray of sun came through the hosts of leaden rain clouds.
Thank you very much for that, Tom, for airing that and all your hard production work on that. You and Sarah worked really hard on producing that video, and I thank you both for that. You've been watching CVBT's Stephen Crane's Red Badge of Courage fundraising gala this evening. We've had some people supporting us this evening, and I'd like to take a quick moment to thank them. Ed and Edward, Chris, Susan, just a couple people who contributed here during the last couple of hours while we were talking about Red Badge of Courage and playing these videos, and many other people who have contributed during this special campaign. We thank you very much for that. Sarah is hard at work getting these videos, the two that we've aired, a third one that we're not going to have time to air this evening, up on the YouTube page. We will be getting an email out to everybody this evening where you can find those on our YouTube page. If you have any questions or problems, you can use the contact form at cvbt.org. And if you've not supported Battlefield Presentation, you can also make that contribution right there at cvbt.org.
We'll also be able to post links to these videos on our Facebook page. That'll also make it easy for audiences to be able to find them and go there. And you can continue to support CVBT even after we're done talking tonight, even after you've watched the videos. You can go online, www.cvbt.org. We'd love to have your support, battlefield preservation. We've been concentrating on Red Badge of Courage tonight, which takes place in the Chancellorsville battlefield, but we have 4 spectacular battlefields that we preserve, all of them near and dear to my heart: Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, Wilderness, and Spotsylvania. Pick your favorite battlefield, make your donation in honor of your favorite battlefield, in honor of your favorite regiment, in favor of in honor of your favorite Civil War book or author. We'd love to have your support. All of your money goes to help us preserve dirt and grass so we can share these stories. Battlefields are an important primary source that help us understand the history in ways that no other sources can. We can read about stories, we can read about primary accounts, we can read about maps, read secondary books, lots of great books written on these battles, but nothing's going to help you understand the battles more than walking the ground. We can't do that unless we preserve that ground. And so that's where your help comes in tonight at www.cvbt.org to help us preserve these crucial resources for our history.
And on that note, Chris, since we are sort of looking at Chancellorsville this evening, just to let our viewers know that we've been involved in saving over 500 acres so far at Chancellorsville. Quite a bit of it has been the Jackson flank attack areas. And I have gone on record years ago saying that I won't really stop until we can walk a large swath of the flank attack without having to break in between. So we're piecing this together as we go. And to let everybody know that CVBT is always working on different projects. We have 2 to 3 of them going right now, and it's our policy not to announce them until we've signed on the dotted line, but we've got a couple of exciting ones that we've been working on. These projects aren't as easy as knocking on someone's door and saying, here's a check, thank you for your property. They take time. In many cases, they take a couple of years. So the work goes on, and your support is just extraordinarily needed in this time, this interesting time of COVID and other things we're going through. It is more important than ever. We have, like I said, we have a mostly volunteer organization with 2 people that we pay. Both will say that they're underpaid, and I would not disagree with them. But we've managed to keep our corporation here, our company going, full staff, fully strong, and no lagging whatsoever. In fact, we've pretty much ramped up what we've been doing. So again, we're still working on a lot of projects. There is no want for having something to do.
That's absolutely correct, Tom, and thank you for saying that. It's been interesting. It's been a great learning curve for me personally to get to know these battlefields, to get to know the important work of preserving them, and we're only able to do it because you become our partner in preservation with your financial support. www.cvbt.org. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in live this evening and hanging in there with us. If you're watching this on our YouTube page after the fact, thank you for giving it a view, and thank you for considering preserving battlefields with us with your financial support. Sarah, anything more from you this evening? Which, before you say anything, I want to thank you for all your hard work on this. The joys of live broadcasting. You've now got a taste of that firsthand. But this was an idea that you came up with and brought to us, and really made these videos happen and this event happen. Thank you for all that hard work, Sarah. I really appreciate it, and I know I can speak for for everybody else on this call this evening, saying that they appreciate it too. So
and I'll just chime in with a little bit of context. Terry and I have both worked in live broadcasting at different points in our career. So although we ran into tech glitches tonight, like I can still think of like a half a dozen instances where things crashed and burned well beyond this. So this was actually, we got to see some things. We got to hear some great conversation. We got to, really get some really neat context and good perspective. So, thumbs up. Sarah, you did a great job pulling all this together.
yes, thank you, Sarah.
I want to thank everybody for this. Give you an idea of our staff at Terry and Sarah.
And to say
one of the things that before we hired Terry and Sarah is we always look for people that have a passion for doing this. We pilfered Terry from Alaska to come all the way out here and do this. And we also pilfered Sarah from California. So they've come a long way with a lot of passion to do what they're doing. So that'll give you an idea of how actually, not to overuse the word passion, but how passionate our organization is about saving our history. So thank everybody, and I thank everybody for joining. We got through the glitches, as Chris said. We actually kind of got through it and got to see some things, so wasn't that bad. We did okay.
You know what? I'm gonna go ahead and let Sarah have the final word for this evening. Once again, before I do so, Tom, Lisa, Chris, thank you all very much for joining us evening here on the Zoom part of the call. And those of you who've been watching on YouTube, thank you for joining us and hanging in there. And thank you for your support of battlefield preservation. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Well, just wanted to say thank you for everyone coming and helping, and Tom and Chris for helping get those videos played. There's always a learning curve. I think we handled this evening hopefully graciously, I've been really encouraged by seeing your comments here on YouTube, and thank you for the donations that have come in. We really appreciate it. And this helps us continue the mission of battlefield preservation and sharing the stories about the Civil War soldiers who fought here. So thank you so much. And we'll get those full videos of the programs posted on the YouTube page and get those emailed out to those that we have the emails for. So thank you so much. Be safe and have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Good night.